welcome to this edition of the CEO Mastermind Podcast. Today, I've got an exciting guest. Yes, we're going to talk about business and journeys and the successes and the mistakes, but we're also going to talk about the implications of energy and how that correlates to AI. Today, I'm super honored to have my friend Troy Helming here. He's had 6 exits and 1 failure. He's also a 2X unicorn founder. Many of you may or may not know what that means, but it means an organization that is valued at $1 billion. And so, Troy has definitely for sure have more experiences than we can remotely cover on this podcast to get to this journey and this level of success and commitment to the sector is amazing. It's enviable, and thank you for what you're doing, in particular, not just sharing with us your expertise as it relates to entrepreneurship, but also what you're doing in the clean energy sector. And we'll get into that a little bit. So welcome, Troy. I appreciate you.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Let's talk a little bit about, I'd like to just understand your journey to leadership in terms of what your path has been over the last, over the course of your career, and talk a little bit on how you've got to get into the clean energy sector. I think we'll cover that topic, and then we'll go into the entrepreneurial aspects after that. But I'd love to learn. When you and I talked, I was totally intrigued about what you're doing, how you're doing it, and how this winding road has taken. So if you can just give the audience a little ride on that journey.
And kind of how I got into entrepreneurship.
There's 2 pieces there. You're right. Let's talk about. Let's just focus on the clean energy side, like your clean energy journey, because it's again, each one of those topics could be 5 hours each, I'm sure.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Well, so that one's actually pretty easy. When I was a kid in the 70s and 80s, I was pretty young, but my parents were complaining about the oil embargo and the oil shocks and so forth, and how they were frustrated that we were dependent on foreign oil, foreign energy. But then that kind of motivated my dad to build a solar system on his dream house. He's a successful entrepreneur as well, so obviously I learned a lot from him over the years. But he put solar on our house. It was a pretty big house, 7,500 square feet, and it had a solar thermal system in 1980. And wow. So, growing up, one of my main chores was to maintain that solar system. It heated our pool, our hot tub, our water. And in the wintertime in Kansas City, where I grew up, we're from California originally, but they moved me to Kansas City when I was 5. But anyway, we would shut down the pool in the winter, and it would preheat the air in the home. We had 4 furnaces with copper coils in it, and it would send this, this hot solution. Anyway, so I was exposed to kind of clean energy from an early age, and it meant that we paid virtually nothing for our heating of the home. So economically, my dad's very conservative politically, and my mom's on the liberal side. But anyway, it taught me, hey, clean energy can help you save money and make you feel like you're more energy independent. So that was my early exposure to it. And then I'll finish up with one more little story. When I got out of college, out of business school, there were no jobs in solar. So I went to work for AT&T, was in telecommunications for a number of years. But then I read an article in the 1990s that said that 3 states, Kansas, Texas, and North Dakota, had enough wind energy potential to power the whole country if we just built enough wind farm transmission lines. Yeah, so I was like, wow, that's amazing. And so I did a bunch of research and sold my first company, which was a telecommunications company, to start the first wind farm company in Kansas in the 90s.
That's amazing. And just for context, how ahead of time, your dad was, we didn't even have fuel injection in 1980. So there's still cars, and I'm a car guy, right? So for those of you that might have been born in the 60s, in the 70s or earlier, like me, cars still have carburetors and burning all kinds of stuff. And the move to fuel injection is I think it's an early 80s invention. I think some high-end cars might have had it in the 70s or something like that, but it really didn't make it into sort of the middle class where average people can afford it. So think when you said that, how far ahead he was. I mean, even ICE, internal combustion engine, didn't even have fuel injection, let alone power windows or power steering. So that's pretty
Yeah.
ahead of its time. So you've continued that trend.
Yeah, wow. That does put things in perspective.
Yeah.
Never thought about that.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about now? You and I talked a bit about what you're doing with EarthGrid. That proposition. We go back to a time where you were ahead of its time with the carburetor, and I think what you're doing now, you're equally ahead in setting us up for the future. So I think you're clearly following in the footsteps here.
Yeah, I think so. So yeah, I guess it's in our blood in the Helming family, I guess. But so EarthGrid is a company that's developing an underground network of tunnels, initially in the U.S., eventually around the world, to improve infrastructure. So power, fiber, and water. Eventually transportation. We'll probably start moving freight using robots in tubes in our tunnels. And they'll be 2.5 meters in diameter. Typically, that's 8 feet for people that don't know metrics very well. But the key enabling technology is that I invented in 2016. I came up with the idea and invented a plasma tunnel boring robot concept. So basically, imagine a little tractor underground with lightsabers on the front, vaporizing all the rock and soil, and a Mandalorian jetpack on the back, blowing out all the little bits of sand and gravel out the back. So that's the concept. Built the first prototype in late 2017, have been testing ever since. Have our first field-ready machine that we made some money with last year, and we just added a second plasma torch to it, and now we're building a 6-torch tunneling machine. The first is a 2-torch excavation machine that can carve out caves or ground vaults for, putting, like the manhole covers. And there's basically a room underground where they have all of the, the pipelines and the conduits and stuff where they can repair splices. So that'd be a ground vault or cave. So that's the excavator. But the tunneling machine, I'm really excited about. It's taken almost 2 years to raise enough capital to build it. It's like a $12 million machine. And we're going to fire it up for the first time next week.
Oh, amazing. I can't wait. By the time this podcast will go live, and I'll put those, any links or anything you want to share regarding to that. When you were talking about lightsabers and all that, I was thinking George Lucas and Star Wars and Darth Vader, they're cutting up some holes in the ground. So again, amazing vision. And I think you talked about the ability to power by solar and all that aspect. I can't recall what fact you talked about. And I had my other sheet of paper, which is gone, but how much more efficient what you're doing is compared to other power sources. Can you talk a little bit about the energy profile versus other things?
Yeah, but first I got to ask, who was who in your vision, in your mind? Who was Darth Vader and who was George Lucas in that image?
Yeah, sure. I saw them both fighting in there, like clearing out the rocks and all that fun stuff. Yeah. I'm a 70s kid, so kind of watching that stuff for the first time. And you talked about lightsaber. I remember even being like a Transformer, thinking I was Voltron, jumping off the couch, and I'm just bringing me back to my early childhood. But it's pretty epic stuff. So
some days I feel like Luke Skywalker. Other days I feel more like Darth Vader when things aren't going as well. Especially trying to raise money for a startup. Yeah, it gets frustrating sometimes. But to answer your question, so each plasma torch depends on the type of torch. And we've been testing a variety over the years, but the average is about 500 kilowatts or half a megawatt each. And so our 6-torch machine needs 3 megawatts for a roughly 2 meter, 6-foot diameter tunnel. To put that into perspective, a conventional tunnel boring machine also needs a fair amount of power, not quite as much, but anywhere from 10 to 20 megawatts for like car-sized tunnels, or maybe 2 megawatts for similar size as ours. However, with this technology, with our testing we've done for 7 years, we've now demonstrated we can go up to 100 times faster, and we're far cheaper because we're not changing out drill bits all the time and having to use chemicals and lubricants and bentonite, drilling mud and all that stuff, and then paying to get rid of all of that. We actually can sell our spoils, which is the sand and gravel, and the sand's useful for concrete manufacturing, gravel's useful for road construction. So because we're so much faster, our energy budget is actually far less, anywhere from 20 to 90% less than other types of technologies. So, and I guess the last thing I'll say is 3 megawatts, that'd be enough to power like probably an average EV charging station, or maybe even a small EV charging station.
Interesting. Who typically fund these? Is it private companies, or is it sort of governments and whatnot, or is it a mix depending by state, by country, by province kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. In the U.S., it's pretty much all private. The vast majority of the grid is owned by, private companies. Some of them are public, like municipalities, and there's a few federal transmission operators, transmission systems out there, like the Bonneville Power Authority and Tennessee Valley Authority and a couple of others. So right now we're focused on private. In other countries like Canada and parts of Europe, it would potentially be governments that would have the grid operators, transmission service operators, that kind of thing. But still, you've got a lot of private utilities that, at least in Europe, that need transmission lines, or they need to bury their lines. There's a kind of a global push to make our infrastructure more resilient due to climate change. We've got more severe storms, whether it's hurricanes, tornadoes, ice storms, whatever it is, windstorms, and of course, a lot of the fires that have been caused in Canada and the Western United States have been caused by overhead power lines. So we need to put this stuff underground. So we're talking over 20 different utilities that want to use our technology to bury their power lines, because we can do it faster and cheaper.
Yeah, and I think that's what I suspected from what I call our last conversation. And I think that's what's important, because your innovation, the driver of modern economies or increase in standard of living is obviously it's a piece of the calculation of a country's GDP, gross domestic product, and one of the biggest contributors is productivity. Right. So if you can go to someone, right, and even like what AI can do for business, AI for business can give you a 10x, 100x, 1000x productivity, because you're accelerating. You're getting the same end goal, which is what you're doing. You're getting the same end goal, a tunnel to put things through, to move things through, but you're doing it substantially cheaper, substantially more efficient. And what I love about it is there's also less environmental impact. So, people want us to leave the place, leave the world a better place for our kids. That's what you're doing, right? Modern society is 100% reliant on energy, right? So the more reliant we can be on our own energy, the more efficient the movement around of electricity and goods and whatnot. It's really critical. We had an outage here in Toronto last couple of years ago, and it was caused by an issue like this, and one of the major telecoms was out for a few days, and businesses couldn't contract, people couldn't communicate, cell phones weren't working, like everything just kind of went kapoots. And so the importance of it to modern life is critical. And to your point, I think the technology we've been using has been rather quite industrial, if you will, right? It's been I'm sure it's been evolved, but it's still an old concept. And you're kind of taking us into the modern world, which is great. So thanks for what you're doing on that front. Let's talk a little bit about, obviously you've been a founder more than once, more than twice, more than 3 times. You've been doing it 6, 7 times now. I think just venture 6 or just venture 7.
It's actually number 8. Number 8. I've had 1 failure and 6 exits. 4 of those exits were meaningful, and 2 of those companies became unicorns, like you were talking about earlier.
From what your experience, and probably from other founders that you've seen, what are some of the common pitfalls that you see, the handful that you can kind of rhyme up the top of your head, that if you were giving advice to another founder, here's what my journey has told me, what your network has told you?
So my first company was telecommunications. I left AT&T to start my own company to sell, basically telephone equipment and bandwidth. in the 90s. And my dad, who's, as I mentioned, an entrepreneur, he's like, make sure you have plenty of savings. You want 12 months of savings. I was too cocky and maybe even a bit arrogant and thought, I was breaking records at AT&T and doing really well. So I was like, I don't need that much. I had, I don't even remember, maybe 3 months or something of savings set aside to live on. And it definitely wasn't enough. It got to a point where I was unable to make my rent payment and, was struggling and eating hot dogs and ramen noodles and PB&J. And finally made that first sale, and then had to basically, pay bills with a chunk of that money. So it hurt my business and it hurt my growth because I wasn't able to reinvest as much of that customer revenue into the company. So that's my first recommendation, is save at least 12 months of living expenses so you don't have to make decisions for your business that are negative or painful based on a short-term personal financial situation.
I like to add a point to that before the next one, because a lot of reasons businesses fail, they don't have a strategy, the right teams and structures, and there's a lot of reasons, but there is actually only one killer, and it's cash. Right? So there's a reason why they say cash is king, and that's really I've heard other people say 6 months, 12 months, and I think that's really prudent because it is the number one. It's the number one accelerant. Like you said, you're unable to reinvest without it, and it's the number one killer. So there's nothing quite, people prioritize. What's the saying? I always say revenue is vanity, profit is sanity. So it's something I always say because it's really easy to get a nice chunky top line. I will take a $10 million business for 80% of margin, a $10 million business to 80% margin versus a $100 million business with 1% margin. Now, there's a million things behind that, but at a static perspective, we probably would do something like that. So yeah, keep going. I wanted to really emphasize the importance of cash because people chase revenue too much and they forget about the implications and they think about margin percentages. You don't take percentages to the bank, you take dollars. Last I checked, the banks and your credit card companies and your utilities and rent, they don't take a percentage, right? They need coin, dollars, right? Nowadays, Bitcoin, they don't take payment, but not in our time growing up.
Yeah, exactly. So the second one would be find something that really drives you. You want to have the power of purpose. Even if it's a great idea and you think the market's huge and there's a lot of potential for revenue and profit, to your point, if it doesn't drive you, if it doesn't get you up out of bed in the morning where you're excited, to go to work and do what you're doing, you're probably even working from home initially or whatever, going to a coffee shop, that power of purpose is what you need to get you through the tough spots. And there are going to be a lot of tough spots.
Yeah, that's great advice. I've found earlier in my life, definitely getting distracted, chasing the wrong things, if you will, in terms of even in corporate, like even if you think about corporate, people chase titles, but they don't chase the meaningfulness of what are your zone of genius, what do you like to do? So I like that you said the power of purpose because that's the only reason why you'll be able to go through the wall. Otherwise, you just give up. And I think the number of business startup, one of the things I don't like is the rate of failure. The rate of failure in businesses is too big, both in startup world and both in the Fortune 500. Their tenure has been declining, but I think it's because many reasons, of course, but I think a lot of people in the smaller businesses, let's say, below eight figures, the power of purpose, it stops. They can't get themselves into the 7-8 figures because they're just doing it for the money, and you can't break through that ceiling. So that's great advice. I love that.
Indeed. I can go all day, but another one that I think is super important and a cause for problems and mistakes that I've made in my career is the wolf that chases 2 rabbits goes hungry. And so staying focused on your core business is the message here. And it's so hard to resist the temptation for what is called opportunity creep, meaning going down the road with your business and a customer says, oh, do you guys do this? And another one says, do you guys do that? And before you know it, you're trying to do 3 different things or 4 different things or even 2 different things, and you're not doing any of them well. And so stay focused on doing one thing and doing it really, really well before you start shifting to, other products or other markets.
Because I go back in my own career, an entrepreneurial journey, corporate career, it's, sometimes you think being busy and saying yes is the sign of achievement and success. And a friend of mine, Alex Sharpman, super successful entrepreneur based in Texas, and he studied billionaires. And true billionaires are people who are focused. They basically tolerate absolutely pretty much close to nothing. Hyper focused, and I think it's really hard to do that. And some people might want to point at Elon Musk. Look at him, SpaceX and this and that. But, well, there's only one Elon Musk that might be able to do that. Like, that's not the model I think we should all strive for necessarily. But I love the chasing and the 2 rabbits catching them and you kind of go hungry, because that's what it is. I forgot his name, but he's another successful entrepreneur, and he related it to the Matrix, where Neo pointed a gun in his head, and he was doing something, and next thing you know, he saw the lady in the red dress, and he turned back to Neo, and there was a gun pointed at his head. And opportunity, the bigger the business, right? Like if you have $1 billion, the size of the game that you can play is much bigger. So the bigger the business, the bigger the red dress is, if you will, that distraction. And I love that you said that, because I've been guilty of it, guaranteed. Particularly entrepreneur, we all have. I think it's like, if it was easy, everyone would do it, but I think it's having these learnings and supporting each other through groups and whatnot to just give these learnings out, because like you said, it will get hard. You think you don't need 12 months of savings? Guess what's the worst case that happens? You don't need it, and now you've got extra cash. Or if you're in the business, you can then take that cash and reinvest to accelerate, right? Like it's just, no harm comes from putting 12 months aside, right? So no harm comes from being hyper focused on something. Like there's no downside to it, really, because you can now become the category of one, if you will. Yeah, let's go for one more, because this is exciting.
So, I mean, team is a big topic. We can maybe cover that later. Make sure that you surround yourself with a good team. But what I really want to, if we're just doing one more, I want to spend time on balance, and I could potentially throw self-discipline in there as well. And I'll just say this: in studying the lives of successful men and women throughout history, they all had one trait in common, and only one trait in common, and that trait is self-discipline. So that kind of goes without saying, and it's not something that you either have or you don't. I mean, that's true, but if you don't, you can learn it. You can create those habits to have self-discipline. But the balance is critical. And what I mean by balance is, my dad was a workaholic. I hardly knew him growing up. And yeah, I was a successful entrepreneur by the American definition, but by many other definitions, he was not successful because, his personal life was not great. He was always physically fit, so he had the physical side of things, but his emotional, his relationship, his spiritual was probably okay, but he was too far out of balance. And so I learned from that. And I don't ever work on, I pick one day a weekend that I don't work at all. It's usually on Sunday. And then I work half day on the other day of the weekend, usually Saturday, just work in the morning. And I pride myself on being a great husband and a great father. Celebrated my 20-year wedding anniversary with my wife earlier this year, and spent thank you, a lot of time with my son. And why that's important is I find that if people are not physically fit and not getting enough sleep, they're not going to have the energy, and they're not going to be as sharp as they need to be to get through the wall, to use your words, and to get through those tough times. And or maybe they'll get through it, but they're not going to be as effective, and they're not going to grow as fast as a company or as a person or as a team. And the last thing I'll say here is, whenever I hear somebody, maybe I'm interviewing somebody, or I used to be an angel investor. I'm not anymore because I'm putting all my capital in my current company right now. It's very capital intensive. But whenever I would hear somebody brag about, oh yeah, I can do just fine getting 5 hours of sleep, or sometimes even less, I immediately dismiss that person as someone I want nothing to do with. Because it's just not true. We need sleep, and now scientifically, it's shown that you need it. That's when you clean out all the toxins from your brain. So having spiritual, emotional, physical, family, having balance in your life not only makes your life more meaningful, makes you a better person, a better manager, a better person to be around. But in my view, it will help you build a much stronger company.
I love that you said that. I didn't know where you were going to go with that one, because again, there's a lot of topics we can peel back, but I totally agree with you there. Earlier in this podcast here, I had a friend of mine, Shauna Robbins. She's out in Santa Barbara, and she focuses on the power of sleep and the implications of it. So scientifically, you're right. My brother, he likes, who said, I think it's Mick Jagger, I'll sleep when I'm dead. Like, no, actually, lack of sleep will scientifically get you to dead faster. And so to your point, if you want to be a father, husband, a son, a best friend, whatever, and have a life of fulfillment, it's really important. And even, CEO Mastermind here, like one of my big focuses, particularly around the people thing, and maybe we'll go into that next, is really about the right people doing the right things and all that. But it's this essence of health optimization. And I was talking to him, he's going to come on this podcast this summer. So a friend of mine is Connor Carrick. And he's an NHL player. He's in the Seattle Kraken franchise. And I was definitely guilty of it. As I get older, realized, he said this, you cannot outmind bad biology. And I would be totally guilty, because I have a crazy mindset. I can focus. I can outmind anything. You can, I think it's one of my superpowers. However, it's also dangerous. And he made me realize in a conversation we had, because it was, you cannot outmind bad biology. There are things happening at a biological level that your mind cannot outrun. And energy flows where your thoughts go. And so if your thoughts are always in work and negative energy, it literally causes cellular harm to your body, and that's what accelerates aging. So I think getting to sleep, and like you said, there's all kinds of science. And I used to think, it's foo-foo, I'll just go right through it. Italian immigrant boy into Canada, I'll work hard and just go ahead. And I've done well, and that mindset has served me. But if I didn't start this essence of focus and trying to unearth my own DNA and how to optimize my health, I might have headed to a sooner exit than what I might have, been okay with, if you will, right? Like you're trying to get there a good 100 quality years, 80, 90 quality years, if you will, God willing. And, you want to make it quality, not long. So, thank you for that. And you're right, like all those aspects, and spiritual, emotional, physical, the whole 9 yards. I think, and spiritual doesn't necessarily mean religious. It just means spiritual. And for me, I have my things I believe in, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. As long as you believe in something good and some purpose, I think it what drives the good across cultures when you really get down to the golden rule. But that's a whole other conversation.
That's right.
It's a little bit out of joint on that one right now. Let's talk about team, because I do think there's a Harvard study that I read, and I got to put it back up, but it's, businesses, 90% of businesses don't have a strategy. Of those that do, they don't have the right teams, like they don't have the right setup. And those that get the first two right in the last mile, they don't have the right team. So that's why my mantra is strategy, structure, people. And only 3% of people actually, 3% of companies actually execute the strategy that they set up. Because in the idea of having a concept and a strategy, there's literally 1,000 things that get done by the time it's executed by the people. And the last mile is the people. Can you talk about your experience around people and teams? And I really like what you said, though, because it made me think, what question should I ask that makes me run away from the person? That's a little tip that I wrote in my head. I'm going to digest that a bit, because you said if they sleep 5 hours, run like hell, because that is probably a bellwether for other bad habits. So I'm going to dig into that. So thank you for that. But yeah, if you can just go down that content sector.
Yeah, I forget the Latin word for it, but to go back to Matrix, the sign when he was talking to the Oracle, know thyself is the English translation of it. But that's important. Be honest about who you are as a person. And so for me, I have strengths and I have flaws, and it took me working in the corporate world at AT&T to figure out what I was good at, but more importantly, what I was not good at. And that's one thing that I was told by my father and some of my aunts and uncles is, hey, figure out what you're not good at. And that was a new concept for me. I was like, oh, I'm not supposed to talk about what I'm not good at. And I did, but it's important that you acknowledge that so that when you're building your team, you can surround yourself with people who are good in areas where you're weak. And that's really critical. And a lot of people don't have, I don't know if it's courage or, whatever, self-awareness to really reflect enough on what they're weak at, so that they can find a good balance. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is find something, a service or a website or a software or a survey or something where you can kind of figure out personality types. I use Culture Index, comes up with basically a report for everybody. We use it at EarthGrid. We had a different service we used at my last company, Pristine Sun, the solar farm company. But it's important because when you're interviewing somebody, recruiting somebody, especially if it's a founder, a co-founder, it's critical because it's like a marriage, right? And so you want to make sure that you have the right people in the right seats on the bus, and who on various teams, who's going to work well with people and who won't. And back to the whole balance thing, you want to have diversity on teams so that you don't have a bunch of type A hard drivers and no one ever writes anything down. Nothing's ever going to happen, right? So I think those are my initial thoughts on team.
Yeah, I'll go back to the first one and comment on the second one too. Having spoken to lots of entrepreneurs and listening to my friend Alex Sharpen and his podcast, I think what ends up happening, and he talks about entrepreneurs, but it's really entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs, those that have the drive to go get things. And I know that's me, like type A, need to get 95 plus on the thing. Like, I got 98, what the hell happened to the 2? What do I got to do? Like, just be happy with the 98. That's what I tell my daughter now. She was upset about 97. I'm like, that's good. You give it your best. Yeah. Did you learn how to get through it? Yeah. Good. No problem. Like, it's good. Like, that's amazing. But I think it's, you don't think about what you're not good at. And as I become more senior and manage, that's a really unique perspective, the way you framed it, what you're good and what you're not good at. Because I think inherently, particularly if you're a driver or a visionary, there's visionaries and there's operators, and most successful entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs tend to be more visionary and don't like to have those edges exposed. They're just like, oh, I got all this great idea, and it's really interesting to make sure that you articulate that and really document it for yourself. Steve Jobs said it, right? I think he said it, or at least he's credited it. So surround people that are smarter than you. And so taking your own ego out of it. I've always looked at myself as a leader to be like an accelerant, or how can I unlock, like in business, I think about how can I unlock trap margin. There's money in there, there's waste somewhere. Let me find it. And I think that's true with people, which leads into the second piece you talked about. So I'm a certified partner with Predictive Index, and I 1,000% agree with you. What I say in here is that, strategy, structure, people. Where are we going? How are we getting there? Who's doing it? Put the right people in the right seats that are naturally designed to do what they're supposed to do. If someone's not inherently detail oriented and you put them in a detail oriented role, they're going to when was the last time a square peg went into a round hole easily? It just doesn't happen. So I think that's a really important point, particularly as leaders and founders and executives. It's really important, I think, that we have a fiduciary responsibility, not just to the business and the P&L and the shareholders, but also to the people, right? Because too many people are walking around unhappy in their roles, unfulfilled. And the question is why? Like, honestly, does business have to be this hard? It doesn't. Now, it's not easy, but I think if you do what you just said, right, know your gaps, surround yourself with the right people, and then moneyball the team. You can actually, with the culture type index and predictive, you can moneyball a perfect team as close as you can.
Totally.
And that's how you get good win, right? Bill Carnegie, I did my MBA at Jack Welch Management Institute. And Bill Carnegie has a quote that I love, that I always think about. And he said, and we all know the rate of business failure is pretty high. It's pretty challenging. But we know how much energy is invested in managing P&Ls and financial. And he said, if companies manage their people the same way that they manage their financials, like they wouldn't fail it. Like if you took the same approach on people, like you just have a better organization. And if they manage their P&L the way they manage people, the rate of failure would be probably close to 100%, because a company is just a piece of number on some ledger in some bank transacting this thing called money that most of us really don't see. Most of our businesses, for honest, it's not a tangible thing. Nobody deals in cash or barter like they did in the 1800s. So we live in something an intangible world. So much of what we do is that. So I do think that is the last mile. A lot of organizations just stop at getting a job description, but then they don't think about the person. They don't think about the human side of it. So I love what you said, because it's all about the human side. Like, how do I fit into this thing? Then how do other people fit into this thing we're trying to do? And then connect it to the purpose. That's why vision and mission are important. Some people think that they're words, but I think about, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this in terms of the next topic, but my belief is if you have a mission, vision, your vision and your mission, and sometimes they can be interchangeable, but then you have your values. I think that's how you fire, hire, retain people, based on that. So if they don't believe in what you're doing, like for me, for example, there are some things that no matter how much you paid me, I would never go and do, right? Because I just don't believe in the category. I don't believe in, let's say, I don't know, let's give a really bad example. Let's say I can make, $10 million a month trying to peddle crack or fentanyl. No, right? Because it's like, no matter what on that side of the business, there's an evil outcome. So I think, people got to be passionate about whatever it is. If you're not passionate about the environment, don't go work for an environment company. Go contribute to society, to something else that might be valuable, right?
Agreed. And I guess also back to team, it takes work, just like any relationship takes work. And in my experience, I've found that offsites work best, particularly with the executive team, and certainly founders. Offsites work best to get away from the office, away from the usual place where people feel slightly more relaxed, maybe a bit safer to kind of speak out, and work at it, and keep refining the strategy, the mission, vision. Absolutely agree with all of that. And it's okay if it needs to change. In fact, most startups have to pivot at least once for them to make it.
So, question for you as it relates to, obviously if you're in a capital intensive industry, raising capital in VCs, but what are some things I've worked with private equity as well. I've not personally raised money, so I've never gone through the funding exercise. I do know, like, I don't know, 1 or 2% actually get funded. I know it's a pretty low ratio. But again, I think those stats change all the time. But what is that world? And I guess that's a whole conversation unto itself. But what is, if someone's wanting to, raise money, what are some things that you might want to guide them on? I mean, these are the things that are always true, based on your experience, because you've been around that block a few times now.
And it's probably the hardest thing about a startup, because raising money is a full-time job, and then you have to do your other full-time job of continuing to run the company and work on strategy, keep the team going, keep people motivated, and all of that. But let me just put things a little bit in perspective. So we already talked about my background, multiple exits, seasoned founder, and EarthGrid's this, crazy plasma boring. It's like science fiction, right? But yeah, we want to develop and build an underground supergrid to rapidly accelerate, clean energy, to enable more solar and wind to go to data centers and factories in our cities and everything else. So it's a great vision. We're kind of climate tech, we're kind of clean energy, a lot of that stuff. So we have kind of a lot going for the company. Despite that, if you had to guess how many pitches I've had to give in, let's see, since late 2021, when we first started raising outside capital. By the way, I was in the unusual position to be able to bootstrap the company for the first few years. So we also had that going for us. Founder put quite a bit of money in. How many pitches do you think I've done? And I think you already know the answer. But most people would think it'd be, that guy, it'd be easy for him to raise money. But if you had to guess, how many pitches would you think I had to do in the last 3 years?
Number, I think I did come across that somewhere, and that I actually have a genuine gap at now. I'm gonna go with at least 100, because I know Sarah Blakely, before she even got someone to talk to her, she got 99 no's in a row. And I don't know how much she pitched. And Sarah Blakely is the founder of Spanx and first female billionaire. So driven, I gotta say at least, I don't know, 70, 80 kind of thing.
2,000.
Oh, I would never have got that. I was thinking maybe 2,000.
Well, I've given over 2,000 pitches, and a lot of them were to angel investors. We haven't gotten a lead VC investor. We have a lot of VCs who have invested in EarthGrid, but for whatever reason, we've never gotten a lead. I don't know why. We have some theories, and a lot of VCs will tell us, oh, well, it's not in our sweet spot, or your valuation's too high, or you're too early for us. There's sometimes a reason, but usually I get ghosted. We've raised over $53 million, including the money that I put in. Tens and tens of millions of dollars from investors, but it took over 2,000 pitches, 97% no. So only 3% yes. And so it's a numbers game.
That's true. Yeah.
So it's like after got to a point where I was, on my wall, I was like, okay, every 33 on average, every 33 no's means I'm about to get my next yes.
I am, no, I actually don't think I even know that answer. 2,000, I would never have guessed that, in particular with the pedigree that you bring. You think it'd be easier, but you're right. There are probably some structural reasons. I'm sure your average might be higher as an index, but nonetheless, that's right in line with the average, actually, like in terms of, like, that's what I heard, 3%. It's like 3% people are ready to buy that whole concept. I don't know if I truly believe that, but I do believe it in business where 97% fail. That is a very consistent number. So there seems to be something, not the Pareto principle, there's another, Da Vinci. The universe has all these laws, and people always want to reject these laws, right? The Pareto principle, they want to reject gravity, they want to reject that there's symmetry. I think it's Leonardo da Vinci, and then the Fibonacci sequence. I think that's another one. Pi 3.14. There's all these things that, and I think maybe to your point, why sometimes people want to ignore, but to your point, I don't need 12 months. I'm the exception, right? Or I'm this, or whatnot. But the reality is if, like, go back to what you said earlier, if you don't have the power of purpose, who's going to handle 1,900 plus no's?
Exactly. And you have to be willing to put in the work, to do it, and just don't take it personally. It's a numbers game. And some people struggle with that. Like my wife, she was my co-founder and CFO at both of our companies that became unicorns. And she can't handle rejection very well, so when she pitches somebody and they say no, she takes it personally. A lot of people struggle with that. So, if your job as the founder is going to be raising money, and typically investors want to see the CEO giving the pitch rather than somebody else on the team. And there's exceptions, but in most cases, investors want to see the pitch from the CEO. So just be prepared to put in the work and grow rhinoceros skin, really thick skin, and don't take it personally.
Well, we can keep going for on and on, but we'll probably have you on for another podcast and dive into some of these other topics. You're obviously a wealth of experience. You've been through it. I love what you're doing now. Not everybody can say they're saving lives and making the world a better place, but you are. So thank you for what you're doing with EarthGrid. Thank you for having the passion to come up with that and to bring Star Wars to life. And it really does. It really does fix. I'm going to drive me one of those machines. I'm going to have to come down and have to work for you for a few days here. I'd love to see this in action with my own eyes. But thank you. I think the audience going to love this. There's a lot of wisdom in here, and it's battle tested. It's proven. Just thank you for being a great friend, and thank you for sharing your wisdom with us today.
Thank you for having me, David. Your Italian pronunciation, I'm going with that. It was a pleasure, and you're wicked smart. I appreciate your podcasts, and hopefully your listeners will get something out of this one.
Have a good day.